point out some things, point out some verses of note. Verse number 1 of 1 Corinthians chapter 7 deals with something we'll get to a little bit later, but it says, "Now concerning the things whereof you wrote unto me, it is good for a man not to touch a woman." We'll get to that in our third point. "But nevertheless, to avoid fornication, let every man have his own wife, and let every woman have her own husband. Let the husband render unto the wife due benevolence, and likewise also the wife unto the husband. The wife hath not power of her own body, but the husband, and likewise also the husband hath not power of his own body, but the wife." This verse is actually what inspired this topic, what the Lord brought me to. Because when you think of the wife and the husband having control of each other's bodies, that is the relationship we should have with Christ. When he bought us and we're now his in salvation, he is ours, we have obtained him, therefore we are his body to use how we should, or how he would. Now, verse number 5, "Defraud ye not one the other, except it be with consent for a time, that ye may give yourselves to fasting and prayer, and come together again. But if they cannot contain, let them marry, for it is better to marry than to burn. And unto the married I command ye not I, but the Lord, let not the wife depart from the husband, but if she depart, let her remain unmarried, or be reconciled to her husband. And let not the husband put away his wife, and to rest speak I, not the Lord. If any brother hath a wife that believeth not, and she be pleased to dwell with him, let him not put her away. And the woman which hath an husband that believeth not, and if she be pleased to dwell with her, let her not leave him. For the unbelieving husband is sanctified by the wife, and the unbelieving wife is sanctified by the husband. Else were your children unclean, but now are they holy. But if the unbelieving depart, let him depart. A brother or a sister is not under bondage in such cases, but God hath called us to peace. For what knowest thou, O wife, whether thou shalt save thy husband, or how knowest thou, O man, whether thou shalt save thy wife? But as God hath distributed to every man as the Lord hath called every one, so let him walk, and so ordain I in all churches. Is any man called being uncircumcised, let him not become uncircumcised. Is any called in uncircumcision, let him not be circumcised. Circumcision is nothing, or uncircumcision is nothing, but the keeping of the commandments of the Lord, of God. Let every man abide in the same calling wherein he was called. Art thou called being a servant? Care not for it. But if thou mayest be made free, use it rather. For he that is called in the Lord being a servant is the Lord's free man. Likewise also he that is called being free is Christ's servant. Ye are bought with a price. Be not ye the servants of men. Brethren, let every man, wherein he is called, therein abide with God. In verse number 32, let's drop there. But I would have you without carefulness. He that is unmarried careth for the things that belong to the Lord, how he may please the Lord. But he that is married careth for the things that are of the world, how that he may please his wife. There is a difference also between a wife and a virgin. The unmarried woman careth for the things of the Lord, that she may be holy both in body and in spirit. But she that is married careth for the things of the world, how she may please her husband. So we can see in this chapter that it's actually better if we give ourselves over solely to God. But as he says, it is better to marry than to burn. If there is that need, then God will supply that need. Now, back in the book of Ruth, in chapter number 2, says, verse number 1, and Naomi had a kinsman of her husband's, a mighty man of wealth and of the family of Elimelech, and his name was Boaz. And Ruth the Moabitess said unto Naomi, let me now go to the field and glean ears of corn after him, in whose sight I shall find grace. She said unto her, Go, my daughter. And she went and came and gleaned in the field after the reapers, and her hap was to lie on a part of the field belonging to Boaz, who was of the kindred of Elimelech. So the second thing you're seeing is that there was a relinquishing of self. You're putting God first. He is becoming your first love. In chapter number 2, we're finding that there is a reaping. Ruth has relinquished herself to God, and now she is laboring in faith. She is doing what God has for her. She is not in Bethlehem on the Bachelorette, looking for who she should marry, but is going about God's business in her life. And I'm about to make maybe a contradictory statement, or sound contradictory, but to find a spouse, you shouldn't look for a spouse. Both Ruth and Boaz are in their respective lives, and neither are looking. God puts them in each other's lives and puts them together. Too often there's young people who are constantly looking and jumping from one relationship to another, and they convince themselves that they have gotten God's will in a person in a relationship that they've sort of forced into existence. I know this to be true because my brother was one of them, and he has that testimony, and it ended poorly. Most relationships built on that are not going to last. They do not last. Keep yourself in God's will, doing God's will, and He's going to provide His will. And if I made a note in verse number 9, verse number 8 and 9, when Boaz comes to her, it says, Then said Boaz unto Ruth, Hearest thou not, my daughter? Go not to glean in another field, neither go from hence, but abide here fast by my maidens. Let thine eyes be on the field, that they do reap, and go after them. This right here, this is a characteristic in a spouse that you should be looking for. This is someone, Boaz right here is encouraging labor. There's a lot of spouses that want to hinder each other. But here we're finding that the characteristic of this man is to encourage into labor for God. Now, drop down to verse number 21 through 23. It says, And Ruth the Moabitess said, He said unto me also, Thou shalt keep fast by my young men, until they have ended all my harvest. And Naomi said unto Ruth, her daughter-in-law, It is good, my daughter, that thou go out with his maidens, that they meet thee not in any other field. So she kept fast by the maidens of Boaz to glean unto the end of the barley harvest and of wheat harvest, and dwelt with her mother-in-law. So our third thing in finding a spouse is a refinement. And these 3 verses, Ruth is discussing, and then she does keep the fast. This act that Ruth is doing in keeping the fast, and that these other maidens are doing, it is to have separation, and it is to have separation to make one virtuous. That is purity. Purity is an important thing for any unmarried individual. It is to protect your testimony and your relationship with God. Sexual acts before marriage is sin, and you're going to be tempted to do so. You will be tempted to go as far as you can in secret and in public, but allowing to will hurt your relationship with each other, and more importantly, with God. I encourage you to always have a chaperone to watch how close you sit, how much you touch, and to be careful with the situations you can find yourself in with your interest. Purity also, I would say, involves pornography. And there's an epidemic of pornography among teenagers and young adults. It's now quickly accessible in your pocket. And parents, I encourage you to keep tabs on what your children are looking at and consuming. I know as a young person growing up in a digital age that you don't have to necessarily be looking for it to appear. And most young people nowadays, they don't need a birds and the bees talk because they've already know it from either natural curiosity that's in their pocket or a friend telling them. from their natural curiosity in their pocket. So always keep tabs on that. Then in chapter number 3, and I'm trying to rush through this to chapter number 3, verse number 1, it says, Then Naomi, her mother-in-law, said unto her, My daughter, shall I not seek rest for thee, that it may be well with thee? And now is not Boaz of our kindred, with whose maidens thou wast? Behold, he winnoweth barley tonight in the threshing floor. Make note of that. Boaz, when she was to find him, he's in the threshing floor. That's a characteristic you should look for in a spouse. That is them enacting judgment on their sin. That's what the Bible shows it as, is enacting judgment on their sin, and it is spiritual growth. So you want to look for spiritual growth. Wash thyself therefore, and anoint thee, and put thy raiment upon thee, and get thee down to the floor, and make not thyself known unto the man until he shall have done eating and drinking. And it shall be, when he lieth down, that thou shalt mark the place where he shall lie, and thou shalt go in and uncover his feet, and lay thee down, and he will tell thee what thou shalt do. And she said unto her, All that thou sayest unto me, I will do. And she went down unto the floor, and did according to all that her mother-in-law bade her. And when Boaz, for thine handmaid, for thou art a near kinsman. And he said, Blessed be thou of the Lord, my daughter, for thou hast showed more kindness in the latter end than at the beginning, inasmuch as thou hast as thou followedest not young men, whether poor or rich. And now, my daughter, fear not, I will do to thee all that thou requirest. For all the city of my people doth know that thou art a virtuous woman. So right here we find, lastly, that Ruth is readying herself. She's readying herself. She's preparing herself for this marriage. She gets herself ready for what's to come. She gets herself smelling good, looking good, all dolled up. And I'm not saying that you should be all dolled up to meet someone, but how you present yourself is important. And more than that, readying yourself involves an emotional, a spiritual, a physical, and a financial preparation. And all this, as we see, Ruth goes in prepared and is told to claim the kinsman, and Ruth communicates her needs and her desires. There needs to be communication. I always say that marriage is not about compromise, it's about communication. Communicating your needs and desires and what God has for your future. If you are called by God to be a missionary, your potential spouse should not be opposed to be a missionary. If you have differing convictions and that is a point of contention, then that relationship is going to continue with problems. If you want kids but your interest doesn't, don't try to marry and force it. That's going to end with an issue. Marriage is not about compromise, it's about communication. Communication about all these important issues should come before a commitment. Those are personal conversations that are needed. I surely don't suspect Miss Angela did not marry in willy-nilly just because she fell madly in love with Brother Mark. But she married in knowing that there were kids involved, a ministry involved, different wants and desires, and God had to instill it into both of them to take that on. And that's where
Amen. I enjoyed that, didn't you? I'll tell you what,